Thank you so much for joining us today, Sean. Let me do a proper introduction for those of you who don't know who is JKR and haven't seen their amazing work. So JKR obviously is a branding agency, probably originally known for amazing packaging, and now does all sorts of things from brand architecture, strategy, innovation, even motion design. And you've probably seen their amazing work for Budweiser and Dunkin Donuts. There is now Dunkin, the famous rebrand, as well as Heinz, that definitely has been across internet a lot, and lots of other fantastic projects. I have lots of questions about Sean's life and JKR life and creative culture and everything else, but I will kick off with 10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Okay, go for it.
Okay. Best movie of all times?
I'd Rather Art Thou by Coen Brothers.
Describe yourself in 3 words.
Indecisive, empathetic, and indecisive.
I love it. Who did you want to be when you were growing up?
Probably, I don't know. I don't think I ever had one. I don't know. Probably the person at the time who made Doctor Who, I reckon, when I was a kid. I was obsessed with Doctor Who as a kid. Yeah.
Amazing. What is one thing that annoys you the most?
Nostalgia. I get really annoyed with nostalgia.
I've heard that about you. Designer or artist you look up to?
Oh God, so many. I love Oliver Lyson, though. I think he's sort of doing everything brilliantly these days.
Yeah, he's a great artist. What's your guilty pleasure?
Pop music.
Any particular song? Any particular band?
No, anything really. Like, I shamelessly love pop music, so like, Rihanna, Girls Aloud, you name it. I'll listen to it quite happily.
That's brilliant. That's happy music. Achievement you are proud of the most?
Probably kind of the reputation JKR's got really these days. I think because it's been a huge collective effort to change the company really. So I think probably that.
Great. What gets you excited apart from work?
Music. Big music fan. Or you might not know it, given I just said I like Girls Aloud, but I do like more than just pop music though. Music is something I'm quite passionate about.
Amazing. What's your favorite book?
Probably The Crow Road by Ian Banks.
I haven't read that one.
Really like that book.
Last question. What is the best part about working in branding?
I kind of like how long your work is around for. It's that I guess advertising it's a bit more instantaneous, and I think you get that buzz on the day when something big comes out. But I think it's a slow burn with branding, and often good design wears in, bad design wears out, as the cliche goes. And I think it's quite nice just to see your work sort of bed in, and over a 10-year period, hopefully, hopefully be proven right over a period of time.
Amazing. Well, it's kind of like architecture almost, but on a flatter scale. I love this answer, and definitely believe that brands is something that we all remember and look into the past and admire a lot. So I love that about branding as well. Well, thanks for passing the 10 questions. So now we can relax and have a bit more in-depth conversation about all things that you mentioned, as well as about the life at JKR. And I want to start with something that you mentioned before about when you joined JKR. You met one of the founders, Ian Ritchie, and there was something about him that really inspired you and made you join JKR. What was it, and what in general did you learn from him?
It was lots of different things, really. I mean, I'd had a really good start to my career. I got very lucky. I walked into a job at a company called Pearl Fisher, and I had 7 really good years there, and I met a load of talented designers who have gone on to be some of the best branding agencies, I think, in the UK. and it was a real melting pot of talent. But then I kind of screwed up my next couple of moves, and I didn't really know what to do next. And I made some bad decisions. I got talked into a couple of jobs that in hindsight, maybe I should have said no to, but they sounded good on paper. And then really, I think I started freelancing, and I felt like I just needed a bit more structure in my life after I'd done small businesses of like 5 people. I'd done mid-sized businesses of Pearl Fisher, but I hadn't ever gone somewhere big. And I'd always kind of liked big brands, so I freelanced for a few weeks at JKR, and it was two of the creative directors at the time, Daniela and John, actually, who kind of kept me around and spoke to me. But then after that, I got chatting to Ian, and I thought there's something I can learn from all of these people, because Daniela's come here and she's trying to change the reputation of JKR, because at the time it was in a bit of a dip, really, in terms of it had done great work in the past, but the work had got a bit stagnant. And I think some of that was the realities of the kind of the world of marketing at the time as well. Like everything was researched to death, everything was doing quite well, so there wasn't really a recession or any brands doing badly, so it was very incremental gains. But yeah, Ian in particular was just really fascinating, because he just I don't know, he wanted to just do really good work for really big brands. And everywhere else I'd worked, every designer I worked with kind of treated like working on the big guys like the thing that brought the money in, that allowed them to do all the stuff they really wanted to be doing, like the museum identities or the really nice the really nice kind of digital projects. And I didn't see it like that. I saw it as like actually redesigning Stella Artois and Budweiser and Domino's. If you can do that well, it doesn't really get much better than that. So I guess I've always grown up in quite a populist house, really, in terms of mainstream films and mainstream media. I'm not someone that's into my weird underground sort of reference points a lot of the time. I do quite like big and brash and mainstream. So I think I just wanted to learn from someone who was really good at tackling the bigger projects, really.
That sounds like an amazing focus to have as a company. And I feel like it's very important to know what's right for you and what's right for your company. And it's great to hear that Ian had that vision about working with big brands as part of what JKR is. And obviously that worked out very well. And now you have like 300 people across the globe, and offices in Shanghai and London and New York and all of that. So obviously that was a good strategy. But when you started working in the company, do you remember your first week? Obviously you mentioned you freelanced, but when you actually started full time, what did it look like? What did it feel like? And also, again, what was your relationship with the founders? Because I feel like a founder is always such a big part of the strategy and the vision of what everyone is doing, that it obviously influences, especially when you're a young designer, or to be honest, any designer, someone obviously looking up to your heroes and the creative directors you work with. So what did it look like? What did it feel like? Anything you remember?
It was really weird, because I didn't really want to go freelance, but because of my last job working it out badly, I felt like I just had to get out of there, really. So I just threw myself into freelance for a few weeks. So even when I started freelancing, I knew that long term I needed people around me, and I like the buzz of a studio, and I'm not a sit at home on their own person working. So this way of working is wonderful for me. So I tried out a couple of bigger agencies that were quite exciting at the time. And I don't know, something about JKR, like, even though on paper, like, I had a lot of friends that said to me, why are you joining, when I did in like 2010, I felt that if you looked at the track history of the work JKR had done, it was some of the best work I'd ever seen when I was at college. And I just felt that it was in a process of kind of getting its house back in order. And I always love a challenge. Like, I'm from Southend, and I'm Southend United football fan, so I think I like a bit of an underdog. Although I'd prefer an underdog that's not always on the verge of going bankrupt at times. So I think I've just always been pulled towards not taking the obvious thing in life. Like, I could have joined lots of businesses that were probably at the top of their game along the way. But there's something I get more excited about going in somewhere and having to work a bit to kind of to turn it around. Because when I joined Pearl Fisher, it was beginning to get good, but there was a lot of work to do. But I was excited by the vision that they had, and I've always been more excited by the thought of building something up than going somewhere that's already there. So it was really weird. Like JKR then is a completely different company to now. I mean, we have the studio, well, not right now, but normally is like noisy, and there's people talking, and there's music, and there's a lot of banter, and there's a lot of people talking in groups, and it's a really vibrant, loud place. But when I started at JKR, Ian hated noise and hated everyone else's music. So there was a no headphones policy, and there was no music in the studio, and you used to just sit there in total silence for like 7, 8 hours a day, which and I think bit by bit those were some of the things that we started to change with Ian. I mean, the major change really were there were 3 or 4 things. One was Ian changed the way he worked, and everything was going through him, which is why I think the work was starting to look quite samey. And he acknowledged that, and he said, like, I keep hiring these great designers, but then I don't let them do their job, and I need to stop being a control freak, and I need to like let you guys get on with it. And he had to really work hard at not looking at absolutely everything that went out the door. But that was a big transformative moment. And then I think the other really big thing was Tosh joining in New York, which is something I'm gonna talk about at length in a week or so. But Tosh joining, I think I think I'd been lying dormant a little bit as a designer for a couple of years. And I think when Tosh joined, I saw his work, and I was so annoyed that I'd stopped working like that and how good his work was. It made me want to start doing it again. And it wasn't just me. There was like the whole studio, when they suddenly saw what Tosh was doing in New York and how exciting it was, we suddenly all said, well, why don't we start doing that in London as well? And suddenly overnight, I've literally got a chart next week, which is the work that was in the studio, and then 6 months later, the work that was in the studio, and it just looks like a completely different business. And it's not that we changed anyone or fired anyone, or it was just that all of that talent was there. It just wasn't motivated, or it just wasn't engaged. And suddenly, that switch went on, and it all kind of changed really. And I think that's the thing really, like in a job, you just have to be motivated, and you have to enjoy it, and you have to want to go in and do great work. And then when you're surrounded by other people that want to do that, then it's easy, I think.
Well, it seems like a magical story, but obviously there was no magic. It was all very hard work.
Yeah.
And a couple of things that you touched on that are very interesting. One is culture, and creative agency culture and company culture, which is something everyone aspires to have, but it's not as easy as it sounds. And the second part is the team and motivation of the team, which is kind of part of the culture as well. So if we can dive a bit deeper into those two. And one thing that I've heard about what you've done during that time is that you didn't have junior designer, so you didn't have a title of a junior designer, because essentially it's kind of demotivating to know that you're a junior. So can you talk a bit more about that? And also, how did you structure the teams? Who was involved in projects? Like, how did it all work?
Ian wanted to kill the title junior more than anybody, because he just felt that with it meant that not necessarily the person themselves joining, but often the team around them would then view them as someone just to make tea or put mood boards together or cut stuff out or run errands. And he was like, I want these people to learn from day one. So he was really adamant we got rid of the junior title, and we just abolished it. And it's something that I think was really, really good. The major structural change we did to the business was we had a sort of I don't know if it was deliberate or whether or not it just was the right thing to do, but I think with John, the creative director, moving to one of the other offices at the time, New York, before Tosh joined to help bolster that and build that and find people like Tosh. Then with Ian taking a bit more of his sort of hands off the wheel a bit and leaving it to the team. What was kind of left was a very, very senior band of design director who had all done like 10, in some cases 15 years, and we were all getting to the point of getting quite frustrated. And the fact we still were reporting to someone else, and I think Ian, had a chat with a few of us and said, like, what's next for you? And four of us had all been going for interviews elsewhere and been offered creative director roles elsewhere, and we were like, well, we're probably going to go, because we're not really in charge of our projects. We never can really have our vision out there, and it's and I'm tired of seeing good senior designers below me leave because there's nowhere to go. So essentially what he did was he made all of the design directors run the studio, and it completely changed the way we work. So instead of this big bottleneck of everything going up to the top, the design directors were told, well, you can hire your own talent, you can hire your own teams, it's up to you to manage your own workflow. You're putting the presentations together, you're telling us what you want to externally get created, and we're going to just wander around and be there to mentor you and help you, and we'll front the bigger meetings alongside you, but we're going to try and stand back. So, and it was that way of working, that shift, that I think I was one of the first 2 or 3 design directors that really grabbed that, and I think that's where I got the opportunity to step up. But I think that shift was really it was quite hard to go from someone that was almost do what you're told to a certain extent to suddenly like, well, now run everything. But it was incredibly liberating, and I think it was incredibly liberating to suddenly to go from that. And I think when I look back on it, I don't think Ian ever wanted to be dictatorial. I think it's just that we were all so in fear of not pleasing him that we just did whatever he said. Even if he would say something like, have you explored green, we would take that to mean, oh, it has to be green. and he would be like, no, I just meant, have you looked at it? And I think because he was such a big character, we just sometimes tended to try and do whatever he thought was right, and probably sometimes at the expense of actually just doing what was right in the first place. And I think that's what Tosh joining made me realize. And then the freedom of the design director to lead the studio, it really just liberated everybody, and that transformed JKR, I think.
Wow, that is a bold move to completely restructure the company and empower everyone to hire their own teams and build their own visions. Again, it might sound like a quick decision, but I can imagine it was very hard for everyone, including people who were promoted. So do you remember what things were you not prepared for, as now you had these responsibilities of building whatever you want? What maybe mistakes did you make, or what did you realize you are missing in your skill set?
Well, I think the one thing we realized at the time was that I think we've always been an agency that does strategy without knowing how it does it. And in the last few years, I think we've got far, far better at that, and we've built a really good team that in strategy. But at that time, really, there was 1 or 2 strategists who were ex-designers. And when we said strategy, it was more like it was almost more just we think there's something interesting in this because of this, this, and this. But it was very much going with your gut or why you instinctively thought it was right, rather than based on any like science or data or trawling of information or going through research documents. And I think that was one of the biggest shifts, that a lot of the design directors overnight suddenly found themselves in a lot of very strategic conversations with clients that they just hadn't been exposed to much before. So I think we all had a bit of a crash course in being better strategists. But it's been for the long-term good of the business. We've now got a really good band of creative directors and design directors who are far more strategic. But that was quite a hard, I think, 6 to 12 months. And I think, strategy is one of those things it's hard to put your finger on sometimes. It's different things for different people at different companies. And sometimes it is creative strategy, and sometimes it's business strategy, and sometimes it's long-term strategy. And sometimes it's, you know, positioning, strategy. So and these, I think it's one of those words that gets wrapped up a bit, and there's lots more to it than that. But yeah, that was a big shift. And then I think also just going in the room and having to be the person that was more punchy, really, because I suppose in the past we'd maybe deferred to the creative directors to lead in meetings, or maybe the account director had done a lot of the pushing. It was a very well run account heavy company when I joined, and the account management was very strong. And it almost replicated an ad agency at times, where there's often more account managers in the room than there are creatives, and we've almost now gone the other way entirely, and it's much more creatives now, and we've still got great account management, but it's the balance is much more weighted the other way. Was when I joined, it sometimes felt that in a meeting you'd always have like a lot of people around you to support you. So I think those were the biggest changes of having to start to, you know, manage your own timings a bit more, take responsibility, rather than, you know, have someone tell you what you're working with and when things are due. To suddenly essentially run your own little mini agency was quite a crash course.
Do you remember anything that went wrong at that time, and
Oh
how did
yeah,
you fix
loads.
it?
Yeah, loads. I mean, I do not know how I got promoted. I've always said that to Ian and made a joke about it. And he often looks back and says to me like, "Yeah, I don't know how you did either. Actually, now I think about it." But I managed to lose. Well, I was looking after two of our biggest accounts in London, and both left on my watch. And like I don't think I think that I think that in both instances the writing was on the wall probably before I took them on, and there were already things afoot. But um, yeah, it was soul destroying to to see the two biggest trophy brands we had at the time just walk out the door, and go to work with people that, you know, I thought a lot of and I'd worked with in the past, and then they did a really good job on it, and it was quite frustrating. Um, and and I think sometimes I look back on it and go, my gut was telling me back then that I knew we weren't doing the right thing on that project, but I should have been stronger, or I should have pushed harder. I should have pushed the client a bit harder there. But I definitely remember a photo shoot where I had to get a photo. We had this bottle of beer encased in a block of solid ice, and it had to look like the beer was cracking out of the ice. And we had this like model maker make this incredible thing, and on paper he'd shown us all of the what it was going to look like, and how amazing it was going to be. And then we got there, and it just looked like someone had taken like a really rubbish bottle of beer that was scuffed and knackered and had been kicked around on the floor for about a week, and they just dropped it in a lump of jelly. And I remember at the time walking in and phoning up the creative director and going, I'm not going to be able to make this look any good. And I knew that that account was on the ropes at the time, and the client had all of our eyes on this, and this was, in their words, our last chance. And I remember telling Ian and John about it, and they just found it quite funny, and just said, "Oh, don't worry, you know, like we'll reimburse the client for it, and, you know, let someone else have, you know." And I remember thinking at the time that I've lost that account, and it's never like that. One moment doesn't lose you an account. It's a constant stream of things over, you know, years. But yeah, that's always stayed with me, just how shockingly badly that photo shoot went.
I think we all have those stories that still give us shivers when we think about them. And I think we all learn from it. And I feel like we need painful experiences to get better and learn
Yeah.
from them. So it's good that you still remember. It means you definitely learned a lot from it. But do you remember at that point, because now it's easier to reflect on it, but how did you feel in the moment when it was at that photo shoot, or when they announced that they're leaving you as a agency? What did you tell yourself? What did you think? And how did you how did you get back to work after that emotional drama?
Well, I felt sick. I mean, I actually thought I was going to be sick, and I took everything I did far too seriously in my job. And my default position at that time was probably get to work at 8 o'clock in the morning and stay until 10 o'clock at night. and just presume I didn't have much of a social life. And I think things are quite different now, but that was basically the industry standard when I started of working. Like if you didn't do that, you were basically a slacker, and that was just true of anywhere you worked. Really, I found over the years. Yeah, I remember feeling awful. I remember like genuinely like not being able to sleep at night, being concerned about it. I remember being livid at the photographer who just didn't seem to care. I was livid with the model maker who looked like, yeah, it's not really worked out quite right, has it? And it was like, you know, what were you thinking? Like, this is completely different to what we agreed to do. I felt sorry for the retoucher who then had to try and make it look good for about 2 weeks after it, but to like no avail. Everything about it was a disaster, really. But you know, you look back on that stuff, and that's what you learn from, and you make sure you don't bite off more than you can chew. Or the thing about that whole thing was we knew we were going for something epic on a budget, and that was the problem. Like what we should have done is we should have been realistic with the amount of money we had to play with, and we should have done something to that budget rather than try to tackle and do something incredible. Because this was also like, you know, 10 years ago, and I think what you can do in CGI and visualizing now is so much better than what you could do 10 years ago. It was a lot harder back then to do some of the stuff that we can do now. So you did have to do a lot of it in camera, but that's not so true now. But yeah, I think feeling physically sick and stressed and worried about it, and that's what I've always loved about JKR, is that you get a feeling that even though things go wrong, and I've always felt that the business has been supportive of failure. But we were fired from Budweiser midway through the through the redesign. And I remember thinking at the time, like, oh my God, well, Ian's going to have to fire Tosh over this. And Ian just found it funny. And I was like, are you not worried? And he was like, well, yeah, of course I am. But he's like, but everyone makes mistakes. It's just a shame that it's on his first job on the biggest brand on our books that he's made a mistake, you know. But Tosh, you know, turned it round with Sarah, and they did an amazing job. But I think I like that about our place, that we've got this value about be yourself. And I've always liked that people do screw up at our place. We've all done it, and but it's the only way you learn, really. Otherwise, if you don't take risks and you don't get a few things wrong here and there, then you're probably not really pushing yourself, or you're not really doing anything new. So it's a healthy thing.
Oh, absolutely. And when you describe kind of Ian's reaction, I really admire his calmness and positivity. I think it's something that is very, very rare among senior leaders, and definitely probably was a good experience for all of you to work with and see that, as you said, you can make mistakes, you can screw things up, but it's okay. You learn from it and you keep moving, and that's a great attitude for any creative environment, and especially for a branding agency.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what does the JKR look now? So who is involved in projects? What kind of structure do you have? You mentioned you have strategists, you have creative directors. What would be the typical setup of a team working on a project?
Well, it sort of depends on we've never really spec'd projects by like seniority or by money. It's much more done by just what the project needs. So you know, it's such a bespoke approach for every single client. It's quite exhausting often getting it right to start with. But I mean, essentially, we always do like a deep dive into the client. We work with like big strategics, and we work with startups. And with startups, a lot of the work is to get out of their head what they want for their brand, because ultimately they've got to go on the road and sell it for the next 3 to 5 years, probably every single day of their life. So they have to really like what they're selling. So I've always seen the job with a startup to basically to create something that that feels like an extension of them, because when a brand is that small, it normally is an extension of the person that came up with it in the first place. Whereas with a bigger brand, it's more often that they've got all the answers in their heads already, that they're just so confused by what to do next, and the amount of voices and the amount of noise. They just need someone to help cut through and make sense of it. And pluck out the three or four most relevant and important bits. So we'll always, a huge amount of how we set up depends on that very first bit. If the first bit's quite easy, then you can almost get straight on with, like, you know, creatively exploring things. But we've run it in all kinds of different ways before. We've had projects that have been in strategy for weeks and weeks and weeks to kind of figure out the consumer map, the experience map, and like figure out how the opportunities are. And we've had projects where, you know, we've done global master brands in like 5 months from start to finish, thinking it was going to be a 2 or 3 year project. So, but the structure is still fairly similar in that the design director leads their own team. They're paired up with another design director in hubs. So each hub has got like a team of about 8 to 10 people in, with like mixed capabilities. A lot of graphic designers, some copywriters, some motion and designers and visualizers. But then outside of that, we have these kind of specialisms of like 3D design, sustainability, voice, which is copywriting, and motion design and strategy. And then we just basically almost like pick and mix and plug and play depending on what we need. So it's quite nimble, and it's sod's law that, you know, someone's specialist area is needed at the same time on about 7 different things. But that's a good thing, because then it forces other people to have a go at something and find out what they're good at. So it's a very bespoke approach for people, but we more and more we, you know, there's usually a week or two of working with the client to get to a positioning and a brand behavior that they're happy with. And then once we've signed that off, we then push it around in design for a week, maybe a week and a half sprint. And we try not to get things too polished, but we try and show the client like where it could go. And then after that, I mean, it's all steam ahead, really. One thing that sped things up, I think, in the last few years is it doesn't seem like clients are researching things to death in the same way they were a few years ago. So that's a good thing. I think that's really sped things up. Whereas sometimes projects I've worked on before would literally be in research for up to 2 or 3 years. So that's been a real positive change, I think, in the last sort of 5 years or so.
And I think this big part of this whole process, as you said, is strategy, is bringing the right people, and also the inspiration. And you mentioned that it's great that clients are not testing things again and again and researching things to death. And I definitely agree that sometimes the just pure creativity actually wins, and doing rounds and rounds of market research and all of these things actually can be a bad thing. And you have really strong opinions about research and about inspiration and where people should find inspiration. So what does the inspiration phase look for you, or how would you advise your design team to go around inspiration when, let's say, a new client came in and they want something very new? What would be the next steps? Where would they go? Where would you send them? How long they will spend doing that?
It's funny, but a lot of the creative directors, myself, John, who is one of our creative consultants at work, who's the ex creative director who employed me, like, we all come from a very similar place in that we don't get straight on the computer like when we start a project. We try and see what comes out of our head first, or we go to a library. You know, I know Brian Collins is a massive fan of books and just sitting in libraries, and I kind of agree. Like, I'm someone that grew up living in a library in my hometown, and going to comic book stores just to flick through pages to get ideas for color palettes and like inspiration, and would always just go around HMV to like look at album covers to see what interesting trends were emerging. But we deliberately try and avoid trends. I hate the word trend. I think that I understand why it's important, and I understand why people want to know about it. But I think that all that trends do is that they spot. I get why trends are important in terms of like behavior and attitudes changing, but like visual trends and creative trends, I think, are awful, because trends are the antithesis of creativity. The whole point of creativity is that you're doing something original. The moment something's a trend, it's a problem, and you're not being creative anymore because loads of people are doing it. So we will often look at what everyone's doing on something and deliberately just do the complete opposite. So on hippies, for example, the research, well, there was no real research for that. We just went to Whole Foods with the client, and when we went down the aisle where hippies was going to be stocked, we looked around, and every single brand in the health food snacking category was brown or white. And we just said, why does everyone look brown and white and boring? And like, it looks like you're being penalized for wanting to eat healthy. And we're like, why can't it just be happy? So we made it bright yellow. We deliberately made it a luminous yellow so that it just stood out. And I think it's hippies has done incredibly well because it's a really good product and because it's got low calories. And I think because of their ethical stance, there's a lot of other reasons why that brand's done well. But I do sometimes think it is no more complicated from a design point of view than just doing something different to what everyone else is doing. And I think making that bright yellow was a stroke of genius from the team, really. So I think that that doesn't happen enough, really, where people go and look in the unobvious places. So I will, if we're working on let's say a packaging project and someone's got a piece of packaging on the board, I will always ask them to take it off, because I'm like, there's no point referencing another piece of packaging that someone's already done because they've done it. So you should be getting your inspiration from book covers or old pieces of artwork, or like, bits of combination of colors you see on like street art as you walk down the street. So most of the inspiration for our best projects has come from very left field things, like the gut stuff, that the weird logo we've got with the balloon tying itself in knots, that came about, I think, because Ian at the time was just trying to make a balloon dog for his kid's birthday party, and he just had it on his desk, and someone saw it and thought it was quite interesting, and that was kind of part of where the idea came from. And for me, that's really interesting. I often look back for ideas rather than look online. I think it's interesting to go back into old art, pop art, trends from the 70s, and not to recreate it, but just to kind of to be inspired by it. I mean, like, there are jazz albums from the 50s that look more contemporary than any album cover coming out these days. So I think that I always try and look where in the least obvious place, really.
I love it, and I love the story about gut and the balloons, because definitely it's such a beautiful project, and everyone who hasn't seen it, go right now to JKR website. It's very aesthetically pleasing, but also a lot of fun, and definitely very unexpected for what the brand stands for. And but it's also fun and fresh, and it's just beautiful. But I feel like the story itself, the fact that it came from a pure random place, kind of shows how important it is for designers to be interested in very random things and doing kids parties on the weekends, and all of these things that have nothing to do with design actually bring a lot back to the studio.
Well, I think as well, like, there's a tendency with design, because it's such a craft. I mean, there's different types of design as well. There's design where you've got a problem to solve, and there's designs where you've got to make things look nice. And when you've got to make things look nice, you can probably do a bit of research, or you can outsource it, or you can get on your computer and make it look good. But really, what I always learned from Ian, and from my previous creative director Sean Bowen as well at Pearl Fisher, was you should start by trying to solve it on a layout pad and think. And gut stuff actually was a brilliant collaboration between 3 or 4 people from very different bits of the studio, just all sat on a table in the library, just chatting for like 2 or 3 days. And I was walking past, and I remember being a bit nervous, thinking we're presenting in 2 days' time and they haven't done anything yet. But they were just chatting, and then suddenly, like, someone was like, "Oh, I've got this scribble, and well, I've got this balloon, and I know the client said we shouldn't make it pink because they were worried about gut health and skin, but it does feel right when it's pink." And I think because they spent all that time thinking about what they should and shouldn't do, then when it came to getting on the computer and doing it, they did all of the first stage of work in about 2 days, and the client loved it. And I think that part of the project is so important, and it's where this way of working can be a bit tougher, I think. And I think also just the modern strain of life, it feels like that's the bit of the process that everyone wants to cut out. And it's like my deadline, my timings, like I need it now, I need it now. I should have briefed you 3 weeks ago, but now I need it yesterday. Um, I just think that if you don't do that bit well, you're just going to ultimately spin the wheels and lose time down the line. And every single project that's gone well has been where someone has had time at the start to get that first bit right. And if you can nail that, the rest of it takes care of itself incredibly quickly, I've always found. So, I mean, I remember on Hippies, we hadn't got it right, and Ian actually told the account team, we're going to have to pull the presentation. It was only the third time in 20 years of JKR that Ian said we're going to have to phone the client up and say the work isn't good enough, but we need another week. But he said we've jumped on a computer, we've tried to execute, but we haven't stopped to think about what's right. And then those extra 2 or 3 days was when kind of the magic happened. And then he's like, great, we can get the meeting back in now, and the client was incredibly understanding. He's like, I trust you, like if you say you just need another 3 or 4 days, and we don't do that very often. I mean, like I say, that's probably happened 4 or 5 times in 30 years at JKR. But it's okay, I think, because it's a creative process and doesn't always happen overnight, I don't think.
Wow, that's an incredible story, and I suppose both parts of just thinking about something that is obviously very important and very invisible and very difficult to justify to the rest of
Mm.
the team or to the client what you're doing right now. Thinking doesn't seem like a very intensive labor, and also on the other hand, being honest with the client and being brave to say we need a couple more days. That is a difficult decision, and you need to have good relationship with the client and you need to have trust in the team as well to make those decisions. So it's amazing that it kind of brings up the how great the culture is and the environment that you build where people are ready to make those decisions and start from scratch and make things right. That's amazing.
Yeah,
And
we did it on the Diner Award as well. We did the Diner Award rebrand a few years ago for free, and we did the whole first stage of work, and we all thought it was really we all thought it was good, and we presented it, and the client loved it, and Tessie, the client, was like over the moon with it. And on the Monday, I got in a room with someone else, Lee from JKR, and Tosh was over from America. And we all got in a room and we're like, I know the client really loves it. And I know that we haven't got anyone booked on it this week. And I know that we shouldn't really do this, but I think we can do better. And I think we should start again. And we all had been thinking it over the weekend. And we came in on Monday and we phoned up the client and said, we're going to still develop the route you've chosen because, a week ago we told you it was great. But over the weekend, we think we've had a better idea and we're going to have another go at it. And actually that the route you see now is that second route that we developed in those 5 days. And I think it can be a hard decision to do that, but deep down if you've done good work or not, or if you're actually giving a client a whole new problem to deal with. And we're problem solvers at the end of the day, and we should be making our client's life easier. It's not about, I don't see it as fulfilling my creative urges or thinking about myself as like some frustrated artist. I'm ultimately here to solve a problem, and I like solving problems for people. So for me, that's where you just have to be true to yourself and go, this is about making it look good on my portfolio, or I've got a gap in my portfolio, so therefore this project needs to fill that void. It's about doing the right thing for the right person, and I think you get a sense as you get older and you do it more of like when you haven't quite nailed it, but then you start to really understand when you really have.
I love it. And I love that reflection on kind of your own process and listening to your instincts and letting yourself making those decisions and those very, very important creative decisions. Everyone who wants to ask the question, by the way, we have 15 minutes left. So now is the time to ask any burning questions and just put them in the comment section below and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. Meanwhile, I have a couple more questions from myself. And one of them is about your career, JKR, because you've been there for 10 years, which is incredibly long, especially for design industry. And clearly you liked something there, and we obviously heard lots of great things that is great about JKR and your team and people around you. But what kept you motivated? Because I can imagine there were points during those 10 years that you were ready to leave and ready to resign.
Hmm.
First of all, what were those points and why did you stay? What changed? And also what keeps you going?
Um, I think when in the first few years, it was the thing that kept me going was I believed that the work was going to get better because the clients were so good, and I saw good designers joining all the time. And we had a great strategist called Silas who I love working with. When I still get the chance, sporadically, and because he's left now, but he's still someone we use from time to time. And um, I think. The point where I was going to leave when I was in probably about 2013, 2014 was just because I felt that I knew there was a great company, JKR, but it was just lying dormant. Um, but I think nowadays, but since that changed, really, I mean, I haven't really considered it in 7, 8 years. Like, it's just been constantly, every year is a new challenge. Like the first year was, okay, let's start to improve things. The second year was a lot of this is like a long term. Like you don't get to redesign Budweiser overnight. You have to do the hard yards. You have to get in there. You have to make relationships. You have to build the groundwork. You have to lay the foundations. You have to, that was sort of 8 years in the making, really, Budweiser, to get to that point where it looked as good as it did. So, um, yeah, I think I haven't contemplated like leaving, well, for 8 years really since Tosh joined, because I've just felt that since then I've just continued to learn more and more and more stuff. And the thing that keeps me really excited is that um, we just keep bringing in people that can do things that we've not done before. Like we only did packaging rollout sort of 10 years ago. And then probably 7 years ago, we started doing a bit more visual identity. And then 5 years ago, we started doing a bit of motion and copywriting. And then 4 years ago, and sort of probably in the last 3 years, we started doing more digital work and more corporate work. Um, so really, I mean, there's always something new to learn, and I think that's what's kept me really excited the last few years. And it's also just people do stick around at our place for a long while. I mean, I know 10 years sounds like a ridiculously long while, but I'm I'm kind of one of the newcomers to some of the designers at our place. We've got people at work who have actually been there for 30 years. We have people that have been there for like 15 to 20 years and came in as a junior, 15, 20 years ago now. So it's a hard place to leave as a designer. Not many people actually do. Like it certainly I mean, I know London. I think it's more of a UK thing as well. People do seem to stay in agencies longer in the UK than they do in America. I think in America people move around a lot more. Um, but I think it's just the constant stream of new things coming in, new talent. And I think when your work starts to improve and the work gets better, you know, you don't get a chance to leave really, or think about leaving, because like the next thing always looks more exciting than the last thing. And that's the only time I ever contemplated leaving at JKR back in 2013, was just when it felt like the work had dried up basically, and it was like maybe it's time to go. But thankfully we turned that around in style, so it was okay.
Great. Well, you definitely seem like you're enjoying the work now, and the work of JKR keeps being amazing. So I can imagine it's a very pleasant experience of being part of a brand that just keeps inspiring designers across the world. And those designers have questions to you. So
Sure.
let's try to answer a couple of questions before we turn off. So how do you talk to the client in order to get everything you can from his mind for briefing purposes?
We try and ideally do a day or a half day workshop with them, and we'll often have like exercises or post it. I mean, everyone does post it note and design thinking training these days, but I mean, there's a certain amount of just get in the room and have a conversation really. And what do you think this brand's doing well? What are you worried about? And we often just let people talk, and most of the information comes out when people start talking. Um, we often try to have two or three like provocations or things that we've seen through we kind of call them eureka moments, but just moments in a pitch or moments in a strategic deck or a mine and define stage where when you look at it, you're just like, well, you talk about what a great brand you are and how much you give back, but did you know that you don't have anything on your website or any of your branding that tells anyone about the fact you give 50% of your profits to charity? Oh, you don't? Oh, okay, right. Well, maybe you should do, because you think this is great, but if no one knows about it, then there's a problem there, and things like that. A lot of it is really just trying to get those nuggets out of the room before you leave. But we try and end every day with a brand on a page where you, at the end of a 1 day session, it's like, why we exist is this, how we're going to bring that to life is this, what we strive to achieve and make is this, who we're going for is this. And then then we write a manifesto with the client in the room, which is almost like a script of, so this is almost like if you had the intro sequence to the brand film, what it would be like. And if you leave the room that day with that, and the client's happy and the creative team are happy and the strategy team are happy, and as long as you've got words in there that are visual, and that's a really key part of what we do, like make sure you have words in there that designers can use, because I think so many words do not help designers out. And it's one of my biggest pet hates is when people promise like game changing or like crafted or premium, and like that's just hollow empty words that don't mean anything. Like that, those words mean 100 different things to people. So I think we try and leave with a blueprint basically of like something the client and the designer can both sign up to.
Brilliant. That's a great answer. Thanks for diving deep into that. Next question from Sarah. Do you have any advice for those on the client side to build the muscle of bravery? How do we get more comfortable taking creative risks?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a hard one, because I think I have worked places before where I've seen I have seen agencies make reckless recommendations to clients. I think I'm not completely against research, by the way. I'm not saying you shouldn't do research, but I think there's scenarios where you put stuff in a room in front of people in a very controlled, hyper real, weird environment, which just doesn't really work. And then there's something like just doing like a soft launch in store somewhere just to see how it does. And if the sales go really well for 3 or 4 weeks, then that probably shows that you're onto something really good. So I'm not discounting research at all. It's actually been hugely helpful to me over the years. But I think there's always a risk. I think this is part of the thing about creativity, really. Like if you don't occasionally do something that cuts through and resonates with people and makes people remember you, then you are just gradually going to decline. So you have to kind of just every so often do something that makes people remember that you're there, really. I mean, that's half of the job, is just to kind of keep reminding people that, hey, we're still here and we're still doing stuff. So taking risks, I can imagine as well, it's incredibly hard. But agencies are more savvy about that these days, I think. We have case studies where we can show the metrics of like how things have improved sales wise, or how decisions we've made have worked, or we have eye tracking data that says this approach does work. If you ultimately you have to go with your gut though, and if you think you're being told something that you just don't believe in, you shouldn't go with it. I don't think. I think it'd be wrong of any client. Like every great piece of work I've ever done has had a client behind it, and I have done what I think are great pieces of work, but I've had clients that aren't 100% about them and they've failed. And then I've had clients who have been like so enthusiastic about the work, more so than I am, and they've just gone and sold it because they love it and they're in love with it. And that, at the end of the day, is what it's about. I think our job as designers is to give a client something that they're going to want to talk about for the next 2 years, constantly, because they will be, and they have to fall in love with it. And if they don't love it, I don't think we've done our job, really.
Amazing. That's great answer. Unfortunately, we're running out of time to answer all the other questions, and there are so many great questions. Maybe let's answer with one sentence. How many options does JKR typically present to a client? Just a quick answer.
Usually about 3, something like that.
Great. And let's finish on the last piece of advice. So for anyone who is maybe a bit younger and just starting out in the profession and want to be as great as you, any advice for them?
Just listen. I think just listen, don't be too defensive about what you do. I think I've learned a lot over the years just by taking things on. And I think I think as you get older, you get more uncertain about certain things, actually, weirdly. And I think when you're young, you've got quite a lot of confidence and you think what you're doing is right, and you can be quite strong-willed. And actually, I think you kind of almost want the opposite, just the opposite trait at that point in your life. And I would just say, go in there, talk to people, try and learn from people, and figure out what excites you and what motivates you. Because yeah, I mean, that's part of it, really. Every job should be different, and every job you should learn something new on. So to just try and learn something and listen, I would say.
I love it. And never stop learning is definitely our mantra. So I agree with you. Learn from others, learn and listen. Thank you so much, Sean. And thanks everyone for joining. If you're not following JKR yet, join them and follow on Instagram. They have incredible work and full of inspiration. So follow them everywhere. If you're not following Futureland Academy yet, follow us as well. There will be more conversations coming out every week with fantastic creatives like Sean and JKR. Thanks everyone for listening. Thank you, Sean.
That's all right. No, pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliant. Bye.
Bye-bye.